Frank, good morning. Another Monday, another week begins. How are you?
Good morning, Brad. I can't wait for us to get started on today's subject, which is about how do you actually lead a cultural change, or how do you actually implement a culture at work? A subject that I believe is on everyone's mind for a long time. But I do think also it requires a little bit of guidance and inspiration. How do you actually, where do you start, right? I think this is something where you and I can explore the subject a little bit deeper today.
Even when you say, where do you start? You kind of just threw the ball right up in the air there, because that is a great question. Just where do you start with culture? Because a lot of organizations, when you go for interviews, they always say, don't they, you know, we're unique in our culture. Every organization is unique in their culture. But then so many are looking to shift and change, because you can't always keep the same culture through time. The world, the landscape is changing. And I think with the backdrop that we've got at the moment of sort of recovery out of COVID, I think culture is going to become more and more critical for people to feel as though they are part of something they want to belong to. So when you pose that question, I'm actually going to bat it straight back to you and say, okay, well, where do you start when it comes to culture in today's landscape? If I come to you and say, Frank, I want to build a culture change and shift in my business, what would you say to me to get me started thinking about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say it needs a little bit of definition. What is it actually when we talk about a work culture or culture at the workplace? And so in my view, to keep it very simple, it's just that when we talk about culture, we talk about the standards that we apply, that we have on how we interact with each other at the workplace. And these standards are based on generally and mutually accepted values. So I know this is still very high level, but the thing is that what you can read out of this is it starts with that you need to have clarity on what are the values that you want to stand for and that you want to live. And these then, once they're established and once they're actually lived, these are creating the standards on how we interact with each other. So, and through that, you start to have an actual culture. That's how I would put it, based on what is a culture, first of all.
So essentially, by having a set of values that we operate by, this drives the behavior of the individuals in the business. And by driving the behaviors, thereby you create the culture of the organization.
Exactly. I think it's a culture is the sum of the behaviors and the standards that you operate among each other and with your clients and your partners on a day-to-day basis. But none of this, you can't have standards if you don't base them on something. And the most atomic piece of it there is the values. And the reason why I'm quite convinced of this, actually. I think the reason why you also hear some companies are saying, I really need to get into the culture space, or we need to change our culture and so on, or that they're saying we have a great culture, but we still have a problem with it, is that it's, for the most part, culture and values, they may be defined for a company on their about page on the web, but they're just a part of a boilerplate. They're not deeply rooted in the day-to-day operations of a company. So there's no deliberate effort in actually making those values come alive. It just doesn't work like this. You say, we have these 4 values, everyone now adhere to these. And that's the last thing you heard about it.
You know, Frank, when you say that, you instantly remind me of an organization, not that I've worked with, but I've been involved with here in the UK. And I do a lot of work with young people with special needs. Going back to my background in psychology and working with young people with autism. And there's one organization who drive respect as their core value. And yet, the amount of times their behavior of the people who work for them in the way they treat the young people in their homes doesn't show respect at all. And I constantly call them out at group meetings to say, on your homepage, it says that you treat all of your residents with respect. Please, can you help me understand how treating this particular individual in this way is acting with respect?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when you're talking about, unless you define them and people subscribe to them, I think this is a really interesting point, because we all have slightly different definitions and justifications for what we think these words mean. It's almost subjective to the point where that can damage the culture. How do you move people to having a more objective view of the definition of a word like respect?
Yeah, you know what works well in this is an open approach to communicating, no, sorry, for defining what the values actually are and what they mean.
Go on.
So if you have the CEO waking up in the morning and sending a memo to everyone saying, team, from now on, these are our 4 or 5 values, please respect them. This can mean anything to anyone.
Yeah.
It's much better to say, we invite the organization to collaborate in defining how do we want to be, and based on what, and what does it actually mean. This has, on the one hand side, the beautiful effect that in the end you get something that is defined, maybe has a couple of examples and so on, but more importantly, the majority of the team will already be on board because it's the values that they wanted to live. And as a leader or a leadership team, you can participate also in this process, and hence you also have an influence a little bit over the outcome. But the key thing is that everybody is on board with it. And that's how you get more detail, right? On, you know, what does it actually mean for us? Courage, you know, or freedom of expression, or, you know, what does it mean? And you get there through this. That's the best way. If you prescribe it, people are just going to say, I don't buy into that. That's not enough. It's also a learning process that, you know, every associate needs to go through to truly understand, what does it actually mean for me?
But if you're a company with 3,000 people, that's quite a big project.
Yeah, look, it's never that 3,000 people equally actively engage in this, but there's you know, there are frameworks on how you can have a core team working on a project such as this one, but invite open collaboration inside the project, where people choose more or less the amount of time that they can or are willing to spend with engaging with the subject. So some of them will do this more, some of them will do this a little bit less, others won't at all because they maybe don't care so much about the subject at this point. But that's how you invite open participation. Of course, you won't have all 3,000 people who work on it full time.
Yeah, that sounds like a headache, even when you say it out loud. But I'm wondering, you said before how, you know, the CEO can't just write a memo out to everybody saying, hey guys, from tomorrow, these are our values. Does it rest with the CEO, though, to maybe make some suggestions, to kind of throw their hat in the ring, if you like, and say, this is what I see, these are the starting point of my thinking? Or when you openly collaborate, should it be everybody gets to kind of promote what they feel those values are?
That's a good question. I think whether it's a wise course of action to make your own suggestion coming from the top or not, or waiting and listening first, probably depends a little bit on what's the state of your culture right now. If you have created or have come into a work environment as a CEO where everybody who is a subordinate will not speak up and will never criticize or will never give feedback, then this approach doesn't work. You should probably better than shut up and listen first. You know, but if it's already a culture that likes debating and where disagreeing with someone is not a reason for getting fired, then yeah, why not? I think they should be, but they need to be participating as an equal and not as the boss. They can be the ones that in the end say, I'm going to make the decision on or at least I'm going to be taking part in the decision and the final definition of things, or I'm going to take part in the decision on how do we implement this later on. But if it's dictated, it feels false and nobody will buy in.
Right. I mean, we've talked before, haven't we? Leaders speaking last rather than first. And yet at the same time, with a topic like values, it's so broad. I know from workshops I've run with leaders, when we start to think about the values-led leader, you know, we recommend to all leaders, you know, make sure that you've got a set of values that are aligned to the corporate values. They don't have to be the same, but they have to be aligned for your team in order for the team to operate. And that creates the culture of the team that then ultimately becomes high performing. Here, we're talking on a much larger scale, a macro level. And I sense that people often look for direction from leadership. But as soon as you start to put your own spin on words, you limit the creativity and the contribution of others. It's like a catch-22.
Yeah, that's right. Yet it's so important to get this started. Although it's a journey, I don't think you can, I mean, even if you start a project of defining where you have open participation, what should our values be, getting to the point where it actually will then begin to define what are the standards of how we want to interact with each other, which is like the next detailed step to it. That will take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's a journey worth going on, because just today I came across a study where people who were looking for jobs were asked about what are the top things they look at having for the next employer, for the next company they want to work for. And the top 3 things had nothing to do with money at all. They were all cultural elements. They were about wanting to be treated with respect and kindness, wanting to have smart leaders that support my growth, you know, these kind of things. These were all in the top. And much later on, you know, 8th, 9th place and so was a good benefits package, and maybe a commission payment for success. So these were coming later. And what does this really tell us? It tells that for people, the cultural environment in which they work is the most important thing. Now, as a company, you can go, sorry, I'm speaking very long now.
No, don't worry, you carry on.
Yeah, but what that means is, for a company, if you can choose to ignore that and just have a great salary package, but it's, you know, command and order in the day-to-day life, and respect is really not existent, then what that means is that you attract people who come and work for you for the money, but they will also leave for the money with no remorse at any time. And in a time where it's vital for survival to have actual talent on board and retain it, if you miss out on a cultural element, I think in the long run, versus the competitors who are picking up on creating a culture that feels good being part of, in the end, you're probably going to lose in the marketplace, not just with the employees. This is the long-term effect of it.
I know you're right, because this for me links to our conversation a few weeks back on inclusive leadership.
Right.
I was reading a report a couple of weeks back from Accenture. So they do like a human capital management report each year. And they found in 2019 to 2020, so it runs April to April, they found that leaders say that a culture of equality is important, and they believe that their organizations are inclusive. So Accenture found, right, that 2/3 of leaders, it was like 68%, feel that they create an empowering environment in which, for example, employees can be themselves, can raise concerns, can innovate without fear of failure. When they went to the employees, only 1/3, 36%, actually agreed that that was the space they worked in. And it was something like 20% of employees who do not feel included in their organizations actually don't feel welcome at work, which was 10 times higher than what the leaders thought they were creating. So the leaders thought that they were doing like 20%, actually only 2% of people they thought wouldn't feel included, and actually 20% of employees don't feel included.
What a
Now,
gap.
Accenture, right? I mean, Accenture go out on a global scale to tens of thousands of people to get this data. So
Yeah.
you have this real mismatch from a leadership perspective, where 2/3 think they're creating an inclusive environment, but only 1/3 agree. And leaders believe that only 2% of their teams don't feel included, and yet it's actually 20%. So there's a real gap, like a chasm between creating a culture and thinking you already have one. And
Yeah.
I wonder, without any kind of answer coming to my mind, I wonder how this gap has grown quite so big. That the gap between perception and reality is so high.
Yeah, it is self-deception to a certain degree, isn't it? Is when, you know, top executives are interviewed and they go like, our employees love the story that we tell about ourselves, and then you find out, no, they don't. You know, this is something I think there's, especially in very large organizations that are very hierarchical, or used to be, and they want to change. It can still be that, you know, up there on the top, you get the impression everything's shiny, but then it isn't. And so what that tells us is simply actually what Accenture did. You need to ask. You need to ask, are we on the right track with our intentions of creating an inclusive culture, or generally a culture that rewards, you know, the right behaviors as based on values that you connect with or not. And so you need to ask, you need to have a control instrument, and a regular one that actually shows where are the gaps, so you can address them where they are. Because I bet even in Accenture's case, I would bet that the 1/3 that said, yeah, we live in this environment, they were probably reporting up a particular part of the business, a particular management line of managers and leaders who were just doing a good job at creating this kind of cultural environment, where maybe their peer right next to them wasn't good at that. And so this is how you find out. You need to ask an employee, you need to give them, everyone, the opportunity to tell you back, how do they feel about your execution on living this selected value or that value? Is your manager supporting behaviors that are based on the values or not? And so on. You just need to give them this voice. And then you need to see, then you can see, as from a leadership perspective, you can see where in my organization do I have to act so that this value and this culture can be implemented in this part of the organization too.
I call these people culture makers. They help make the culture by engaging with people and really listening to what's going on for them. Because when you sit at the top, you can drive culture and you can drive change and you can drive behavior. But unless you're modeling the way, people beneath don't subscribe.
Yeah, 100%. You can't delegate to anyone on your leadership staff. Your job is to create a culture. I think this is something that, in the end, when the culture is defined, ideally in this open approach, you need to be, as the person on the top, the number one impeccable culture creator, so to speak, that in all of their actions, without any exception if possible, is demonstrating that he lives by those values. Because how can he then ask from anyone else to also respect the values and the standards that are derived from this? If this is the most critical element, is the person on top.
I know that my own team who work with me, one of our values is to have fun.
Yeah.
And in coaching calls that we have as a team, in debriefs, there's one particular member, she works out of Korea, and she'll always highlight, guys, don't forget, we're here to have fun.
Yeah.
And she calls us all out on it when it's starting to get a bit serious, or where maybe there's a little conflict, people are disagreeing. She reminds everybody that actually, hey guys, we subscribe to always having fun. dial it back. Let's just laugh at ourselves a little bit. And normally they can laugh at me because
Yeah.
I'm happy to put myself out there for them to laugh at. But I think it's really important because you touch on a point here where it's not just about the leaders. Because if I'm going to subscribe, say, to your company's culture and values, when I'm joining the business, I'm asking and I'm finding out, how do you operate? What's your agreements with each other? When I join, I then need to almost have my behaviors reinforced. I think there's almost, isn't there? There's a stage here where actually you reinforce culture by being able to acknowledge maybe when you see it or even when you don't see it.
Oh yeah, both. That's actually part of the culture, is this feedback mechanism. It has to be embedded in it. So one of your standards needs to be that you call out when a behavior that you have observed is non-compatible with the values that your culture is based on. And you do this both in the moment. With a person, you can give feedback. Maybe if you're in a manager associate situation, you have maybe also your reviews where you can actually give feedback on behaviors observed. Depends on what the behavior was. Some things you need to address right away. Other things you can park a little and say, hey, we need to develop here a little bit. That's important, but it's not just about criticizing the behavior. It's also about rewarding. It's rewarding when you observe behaviors that are reinforcing the values and are reinforcing the cultural standards that you want to live, because everyone else needs to see as well. It's also worth it. There is an acknowledgement element that's part of the culture that just says, thank you for being how we want to be, for modeling the way. And modeling the way is something that everyone can do. It's not just the CEO. I'm just saying the CEO needs to be 100% behind this. He can never break away from the rules, because that's permission for everyone else to do so also. But everyone else in their day-to-day life can demonstrate and model the way based on the values and the behaviors that you have defined should be part of your culture.
And I think there's an opportunity every time we praise somebody, even for a piece of work, if we can make an alignment to what they've done and how that lives and breathes the values of the team, because then we can not just praise them for doing a good job, but we can praise them for doing a good job and thank them for doing that job by living the values of the business. So there's a really lovely connection for me in encouraging people's hearts, leading with compassion that we've talked about before, and really making people feel like, you know what, actually, this helps me reinforce for my team why what they're doing is so important. So the next time they do it, they keep reliving the values, and this really breathes life into what for a lot of companies is just a dormant set of words that sit on their landing page.
Right. That's really the problem. If it's just this this boilerplate that nobody believes in because they're not true, you don't go anywhere. And always, connecting any sort of laudatio or rewarding of a particular behavior back to any of the values, or even multiple ones that were an example in the particular behavior. This is a really good practice, because it also reminds everybody what were the values again. It takes time to internalize that.
Completely. I remember working with a retail company. One of the best managers actually I ever worked with. He wasn't high level. He was middle management. He was late 30s. He loved people. And I remember doing some work with him and his team and observing him in action, like on the floor. So it's a manufacturing and retail company.
Yeah.
And they made beds, basically. And I remember watching him thanking somebody for the way they had handled a complaint on the phone. So the bed was due on a particular date. It was 3 weeks late. There were challenges getting, dates to set when the delivery would happen. And you could hear by, I was listening into the call, that the customer wasn't happy by any measurement of happiness. And the way this customer service, customer excellence, they're called, the way this specialist was dealing with this complaint was fantastic. And one of their values was to treat all customers with high level integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And when the manager thanked, the complaint was resolved, a new date was found, the customer left happy, if a little frustrated, the manager went over to the individual there and then on the floor and thanked them publicly for, well done for how you handled the complaint, gave specific examples of what they did in the complaint handling conversation that was so powerful, and then reinforced that by linking it to two of the core values of the business, which, you know, sit on the wall in a nice poster. Honestly, Frank, this guy's face, this guy's face who was receiving it, he looked a little bit taller. He was smiling, he sat up, and the way he picked the phone up the next time, you could see it really meant something to him.
Yeah.
So there's a real opportunity if, you know, when you talked, you started today by creating culture. Actually, we can really create a positive working environment by leveraging culture as part of our everyday communication. Once it's set, of course. What about the calling out piece? You reference that now twice. You know, you've got to call people out when they're not living it. What do you mean by that? Because that sounds instantly more of a challenge. It's lovely to call out people when they do it well, but you're talking about when they're not living.
Yeah, that's right. But, you know, I'm going to answer your question, but I just quickly wanted to add something to your example that you just had. Now imagine this excellent and talented customer service person would not work in an environment where he has been, you know, called out in a positive way and thanked for and appreciated and respected for his work, but only maybe got a €100 raise or something like that, was being a little bit more than everybody else. With the next opportunity, you don't, money is important. I know if somebody gives me money, don't get me wrong, I'm going to take it, right? But if that's the only thing that I get and I feel not respected or valued for my contribution, I'm very open to leaving. And that's actually also what this study was talking earlier about, actually in the end said, you know, if the top 3 things that are important for me that have to do with kindness, respect, and an opportunity to grow are not given, man, why would I stay? Tell me. I have no idea why I would stay if somebody gives me the same or a better salary. Right?
Yeah, because it's not about the money.
Well, no, not with regards to feeling happy and in the right place. As I said, don't get me wrong, nobody will say, I'm going to work in a super nice environment for free.
No.
Right? That's not the case. But the thing is, this element which makes you so much more competitive in the talent space, having a culture that feels nice to be in the end costs you nothing. Think about that. Now I'm going to answer your other question about how do you call out, let's say, behavior that is not in line with the values that you want to make up your culture from.
Right.
That probably depends a little bit on the kind of, let me call it for the moment, cultural infringement, right? So I think there are behaviors that are so unacceptable that the only correct sign that you can set is to fire someone's ass on the spot.
Right.
But there are also areas where you just say, you know, somebody hasn't been as respectful as they could have been, or was breaking a commitment that he made earlier, if commitment is one of your values, that you just take someone aside and have with them a typical feedback conversation where you say, in this situation, this is what actually happened, this is what you did, and show them what the impact of that was, and then remind them of that you have this cultural element so that everybody else can, you know, rely on commitments that everybody else makes. And so it connect the behavior to the values and why they're important and so on, and just ask them to try and do better the next time. So it can be as mild as that. It can also be take a semi or formal form actually in reviews. So many companies do quarterly or annual employee talks and reviews, and remembering the things that have happened throughout the year or the time period that you're reviewing and bringing them up in a conversation with the intention for improvement, not to, point someone out or make them feel bad, for the intention of helping and improving. I think this is how you do the call out piece in those situations.
I think it's really interesting, because how do we get leaders to prioritize culture? For me is a critical question, because if you look at leadership priorities, if you were to sit on an executive leadership's quarterly business review, my sense tells me, I've sat on a lot of them, that financial performance will be a top priority. Brand quality, we were talking just before, will be a top priority. Talent would probably be a top priority, maybe even expansion, and possibly innovation would be like the top 5 I would list as what most quarterly business reviews talk about. Yes. How often do we hear culture on that top 5 list?
Look, more and more, don't you think? I know it's you want to go there, that we're saying we don't hear it very often, but I think we hear it more and more, because as it's been talked about more in the recent years, it's become also more clear that you get the awareness that talented people who are enabled to act and feel connected with what you do, they can be 50 times more efficient for your company than a person who isn't. And also every company that is in any competitive space somehow needs to find the best talent on the market, but you can't make someone work for you. They need to want to choose to work for you. And I think your HR team is telling you that either it's very hard to find people that are great and also want to stay, or it's very expensive. They're spending loads of money finding even leads for people who want to come to interviews and so on. If all that's the case, it's indicators that actually the cost of your business is way too high. And there's also this dimension of, when you talk about innovation, I don't think unhappy people innovate. Unhappy people do at the workplace, they do what's required. But why should they go above and beyond? Right. They have really no reason to do so. And so you find very little innovation in the company culture that's not encouraging in this sense. So I think as the top level, the C-level suite of companies more and more becomes aware that we're actually talking about a very critical component in the times that we live in now. People have so much choice, Brad. People have so much choice. Educated people have so much choice of what they can do with their lives, and they don't have to work for you.
I'm listening to you. I was scribbling some notes earlier, and it seems to me that you kind of created 3 top comments for this, priorities almost. 1, we have to prioritize culture, even in challenging times, challenging even financial times, right? Culture has to remain a kind of top business imperative. Secondly, you've talked about, for me, establishing a roadmap where we as leaders go out to the business and engage with our people to gather the data, to establish, what it is that we're trying to operate like, so that we can subscribe to a set of values. And the third thing that you've referenced for me, on top of prioritizing the culture and establishing the roadmap, is actually holding people accountable, both by rewarding and acknowledging it, but also calling it out.
Yes.
Do you see anything else? Have I maybe missed anything from what you're kind of promoting here? Because I love the idea of prioritizing, creating roadmaps, and holding people accountable. Maybe we've kind of simplified what people can do to really start to build an inclusive culture that lives and breathes every day.
Yeah. No, you haven't missed anything, actually. But I would just like to say, I think accountability should always be one of the values.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's needed for imbalancing with, let's say, some more of the feel-good values that you might want to have about the,
Right.
the freedom to express yourself and so on. So this, because we're talking about a business and not about a golf club, something like that you do in your leisure time. A business needs to make business, so their values need to be balanced with what's needed in order to actually excel in the business, but you also need to have values that are important that speak to the humanity of the people and their most basic desires, such as freedom, for example. And I think these need to be in balance. All of them need to exist.
Yeah, if I sign up to a set of values, it's almost implicit that accountability has to be there.
Yeah, it's almost implicit, yes. So somebody needs to, in the company, everybody needs to say that that they understand, this is my role, this is the contribution that I make, or this is the contribution that I signed up for, that I said I'm going to do. I will and I want to be held accountable for actually doing that. That's super important, right?
Yeah. And actually would create a really powerfully high-performing environment if everybody publicly or silently, actually, I don't think it matters, signed up to that kind of level of accountability.
Yeah.
That's how you build a high-performing team.
Imagine you could rely on the fact that everyone feels and is accountable for their part. That's actually the fundament for you to blindly trust everyone you work with that they're going to execute.
Yeah, yeah.
So you don't have to worry about trust. You can just trust.
Yeah.
Because it's part of your culture that everybody says, I'm accountable for this.
Right, I'm going to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I like the sound of that. Frank, I think we've come full circle here.
Yeah.
We started with what is culture, and we've kind of ended with what is culture.
Exactly. No, super subject.
Love it. Frank, that was brilliant. I can't wait till next time. Let's see if we can build on this even further.
Likewise. Take care, Brad. See you soon.
All right. Bye, Frank.